in the way that he will over 12 or 18 months. And so will Trump still be unpopular on election day in 2020? Almost certainly. Will he be less unpopular than his opposition? I hope so, but I don't think we should take that for granted.
Democrats are always caught by surprise by this. But if Kamala Harris is the nominee, I guarantee you that her negatives will be worse than Hillary Clinton's by election day. The one person it'll be a little more difficult to do this to than anybody else is Joe Biden.
Simply because people already have such an entrenched opinion of him?
Yes. Yeah, he's such a known brand. But there may be things you can activate against him. And the thing that you do with a Biden is you don't go directly against him, you go against his coalition. But the Democrats have a lot of candidates who come from groups that the Republicans will be able to activate against.
So you think this is a matter of pure bigotry? The way you were saying that sounded like the reason why Kamala Harris's approval ratings will be so underwater in 2020 is because she's a black woman, and so Republicans will be able to activate resentment against blacks.
So just as I bristled against your use of the term solidarity, I'm going to bristle a little bit against the term bigotry, not to be pedantic, because I think a lot of the liberal language about difference is based on a moral assumption that there is something aberrant and weird and in need of explanation when group dislikes group. So the norm is that everyone loves everyone else, and the aberration is that people don't, and we're very moralistic about it. So my view is that the dislike of group against group is natural. And one of the challenges of politics is, since the groups are actually quite arbitrary and often completely invented in the moment, that the marveling thing is the ability to create this kind of shirts versus skins, our group against your group out of pretty scanty material. But the Democrats cooperate with this. I mean, I'm just struck by when Pete Buttigieg emerged as a top tier or second tier. So there's Biden and Sanders are tier one, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Buttigieg are, I guess, drawer two, and then everybody else is down below. How many thousands of think pieces did you read about, yes, he may be gay, but he's a white male? And the Democratic coalition is also driven by group animus. A group animus that Democrats themselves happen to find an acceptable group animus, but a group animus nonetheless. And that's real. That, resentment of whites and males and of white males together, that's a powerful political force. And I don't call that bigotry either, because, that's just the way we build things.
So we'll get back to the electoral politics, because I think that's an important point there. But I want to dig down into this, because I guess I would call it bigotry, right? So to me, there is a fundamental question about identity politics at the moment, where there are a few different positions, right? So the left position, I think, is, look, when you look at Donald Trump, when you look at the Republican Party, that's all a form of white identity politics, and that's evil. So far, so good. I think that's broadly right. What we should do in response is to mobilize an identity politics of our own, where we assemble a coalition of groups that will be politically activated. And A, that way we will win a big majority because of various demographic trends in this country. And B, that's good. I have a problem with both of those premises. I don't think, for various reasons, that that is a winning coalition. But more importantly, I don't want to counter one set of group solidarity movements with another.
Well, the Democrats are also often very naive about how much all of their different groups like each other.
Right, and I've talked about this a little bit before.
So the Democratic advantage is their coalition is always potentially bigger than the Republican coalition. The Democratic disadvantage is it's much more unstable. As, there's Pete Buttigieg, who's impeccably gay, right? Which is supposed to be a Democratic group, but he's also very white. Now, maybe if he were the actual literal nominee, they would decide the gay was more important than the white, or maybe they drop all of this stuff in the general election cycle. But in the moment when, the other rivals are sharpening their knives against each other, this becomes an important thing.
Yeah, there's two important pieces to his triumphalism, right? One part of his triumphalism is cultural. I remember reading Rita Teixeira's report in March 2009 about the inevitable Democratic majority, saying people are becoming more accepting of gay marriage, and therefore we will always win the cultural debate. Culture is no longer going to be important in American politics. But of course, now it is amazing that even Donald Trump has not really attacked gay marriage. But of course, there's other issues which are polarizing. Right. And it's not obvious that on those issues, Democrats have a bigger advantage than they did on gay rights in the mid-2000s. The other piece of it is demographic. To assume that everybody who has a drop of non-white blood somehow magically has the same political views or is on the same political side is clearly naive. But I want to get back to the question about what that means for the politics we should build, because I guess I would want to call somebody who will not vote for Kamala Harris simply because she's black a bigot. And I also don't think that, as people like Eric Kaufman are currently arguing, the solution to this is simply to be coherent and to allow all different forms of group identity. And nor is it this sort of solution on the left, which is to say group identity for minorities is fine, but group identity for whites is not fine. I think we need to keep the expressions of group identity in check politically, while recognizing that people are drawn to them, or recognizing that there's real discrimination and disadvantage that we have to struggle against.
Well, I want to just add to that with the thought that we are familiar with a world in which the most important attack factor of Kamala Harris is that she's not white. We're moving into a world in which the fact that she's a woman is also an important attack factor. Now, there's always been, of course, anti-female feeling and anti-female prejudices, but there's something new that is happening. And this is one of the things that Donald Trump stumbled into very acutely. And one of the things that's wrong with the Rui Teixeira view of automatic change. We're moving into a world, there are always new dividing lines. And we're moving into a world, or we have moved into a world in which the dividing line between the sexes is becoming as sharp a distinction as that between the races. This didn't used to be true. When most men and most women live in marriages with each other, it's pretty hard to imagine something that's bad for husbands that's good for their wives, and vice versa. But men and women live apart on a scale never seen in the history of the human race today. That an absolute majority of people under age 35 are not married or partnered. More people under 30.
I presume you mean between 18 and 35 or something like that. We're not counting the kids.
Yes, 18 to of marriageable age. An absolute majority of adults under 35 are unmarried or unpartnered. And more people who are adult under 30 live with their parents than live with a partner. And what we are seeing is a gender gap that dwarfs anything ever seen in American politics, and a values gap. When you ask a question like, do you prefer a bigger government that offers more services at higher taxes, or a smaller government with fewer services at lower taxes? The gap between men and women on that point is now over 20 points, which is, again, staggering. And men and women are becoming subcultures. And I think it's really striking when you watch any kind of online discussion, how much mutual, certainly among women, this is now in social media very much expressed. And the male hostility also expresses itself, like Gamergate. I mean, at the time, it was so hard to understand, especially.
And now it looks very prescient in terms of what our popular culture now is like. Yeah.
I remember during Gamergate, which is the side that thinks you should turn off the video games and play outside? That's the side. That's my side.
I disagree with you on that. I feel like one of the few reasons why I would seriously consider having kids at some point is that you can play video games while being a good parent for spending time with kids.
Well, there's a generation gap between us, because I'm still, who wants to go outside and play ball? No, nobody. But Donald Trump is a voice not just of white identity politics, which he is, but also of a lot of male sexual resentment. But Hillary Clinton was a candidate of a lot of female resentment. And in this case, I think you can see the language of bigotry is really the wrong language, because if men and women are mad at each other, there's no winners from that. That all represents a lot of loneliness and sexlessness and children who are not being born. And neither side is right nor wrong. They need to be together, and they are apart.
I think we have an interesting difference in baseline assumptions here, which is that I still tend to believe that what's more important is how somebody talks than who they are. I think that's the only way to understand authoritarian populism, for example. There are certainly some authoritarian populists who very much embody the social class, who they have mobilized and to whom they owe their electoral victories. I think three obvious examples actually, are Viktor Orban in Hungary, Recep Erdogan in Turkey, and Narendra Modi in India, who are all people from a provincial lower middle class, who have stormed into politics precisely as those groups have become more affluent and thereby more self-confident and outspoken, and rebelled against metropolitan elites that in those contexts really did look down on them, sometimes in quite shocking ways. But then, of course, there's the counter-examples. People like Donald Trump, people like Nigel Farage, even in certain ways, people like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who, to varying extents, do come from an elite class and certainly should not be in political communion with the coalition that they have built. And the reason that they've been able to do that is because they are on their side. Now, you can see that even with some minority candidates. I mean, there was not the same male counter-reaction to Sarah Palin as there was to Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's no mystery.
And it's not clear to me. No, of course, because she's sort of a gender traitor or class traitor or whatever it is, right? But the same is true of people like Herman Cain and so on and so forth, right?
But Sarah Palin and Herman Cain ratify views about the way women and blacks should behave. The most important thing about a woman is she sexy? And the second most important thing is she fertile? I'm both. So you can accept leadership from me. And Herman Cain said the most important thing about black men is, does he make whites feel comfortable in the feelings they have about black people? And he abundantly did. And he was his own walking minstrel show. And then people said, well, then maybe there's something inspiring about this. I have nothing against you qua you, so long as you don't make me rethink how I should think about you. I'm not prepared to have a black president who thinks he's better than me, like Obama, but I'm quite prepared to have a black president who doesn't think he's better than me, like Herman Cain.
Why does Herman Cain not think that he's better than you?
Herman Cain spoke in a stereotypically black way. He was not visibly intellectual. Barack Obama was, you show me a belief that prejudiced white people have about black people. And
Barack Obama single-handedly disproves it.
I'm not. By the way, I'm punctual. I'm the most devoted father and husband of any of the recent presidents. I'm serene. My idea of a good I'm a neurotic introvert. My idea of a good time is going into bookstores and looking at advanced modern fiction. That's what I like to do in Martha's Vineyard. If I weren't president, I'd be an inward-looking novelist.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this slide that annoyed me very much from a recent training for school principals and others in New York City, organized by the Chancellor of New York City Schools, which said that things like objectivity, worship of a written word, perfectionism were hallmarks of white supremacy. Well, I think that there's something very deeply wrong with that set of assumptions. I think it would come, for example, as a big surprise to the 1.2 billion Muslims in the world who certainly worship the written word.
Donald Trump believes in white supremacy and he's illiterate.
Right, exactly. But certainly, actually, thinking back to that slide, it reads like a description of Barack Obama,
right.
Which is ironic. So what about a candidate who's on the left? What about a candidate who does not want to do what Sarah Palin or Herman Cain did? Do you think this basically means that as long as you are on the side of gender equality, as long as you're on the side of fighting against prejudice and discrimination, you're going to run into these problems? Or is there a real difference in how you talk about some of those issues?
I'm not in the business of offering electoral advice to Democrats, but just look, the Republicans have shown you can carry with you a lot of things that voters don't like. And if you touch enough things they do, they will forgive you. So most Republican policies are pretty unpopular, but they're able to overcome it by touching certain kinds of emotions. For Democrats, the solution is you just talk about the policies all the time. I mean, the big problem that I think Democratic candidates for president have is they have too many ideas. So Hillary Clinton, I think if she had walked out onto that stage with a blue hat that said Medicare at 50 and never said anything else, she'd be president. Now, what do you think about the situation in West Africa? Well, I think we will be a stronger country and better able to deal with security threats from West Africa when we have Medicare at 50. and just never talk. But she couldn't, right? Because she had.
You think Democrats should have a noun and a verb and Medicare at 50?
Medicare at 50. And that's not the only answer. There are other things they stand for that are also
but something that delivers a tangible economic benefit to Americans irrespective of identity.
Right. And then people say, I don't love all the other things this candidate stands for. And, they irritate me in various ways and they don't belong to my group. But, I just turned 50. And Medicare would be pretty good.
Yeah. So you do have one topic on which you have given electoral advice of sorts to center-left parties. In a recent cover story for The Atlantic, you essentially argue that their stance on immigration is one of the reasons why a lot of center-left parties have suffered, in particular social democratic parties across Europe, and that they have to rethink how they talk about and what kind of policies they endorse on immigration. Give me a short version of that argument. Explain to the listeners what you mean by that.
So I see immigration as the fuse, not the explosive, in the rise of authoritarian populism. There are deeper and other things that are going on, but this is the one that always ignites and leads to the explosion. it is not true that if you were to solve the immigration problem, you would solve everything that makes advanced societies unstable or has made them